And good evening to our fellow listeners and viewers. This is on Sunday, June 11th at 8:18 p.m. This is Federico Lyons of States' Rights Radio.
And Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports.
And tonight's episode is Juneteenth has more constitutionality than Pride Month in the month of June. By what I mean by that is that, I think the sense of freeing slaves and giving Black Americans and minorities the rights that they deserve, as well as white voters and white citizens, has more of a constitutionality than same-sex marriage or transgender or whatever you want to call it these days, binary and all that. So I think, when I look at the whole month of June to celebrate something called Pride Month, I think that's a little overdoing it. I'm all for privacy. I'm all what you do behind your closed doors is no one's business but your own, and certainly no state or federal government has that right to get involved. So I see it kind of a little too much. What do you think, Seth?
Obviously I wrote about quite a few pieces last couple weeks on Pride Month, and obviously I come from a Christian perspective, and so I obviously have issues with this, and it's not even as much as it is on the homosexuality and stuff, but pride itself is a sin, which it's kind of, as a Christian, it just kind of smacks in your face, this is just wrong off the bat. But we also need to, a lot of what I wrote about was from that Christian perspective and didn't really get into the Constitution much, but that is something we need to discuss about what are states allowed to do, or what's the government allowed to do when it comes to these issues like gay marriage, like marriage in general, is and how do we engage with the culture? I come from I don't necessarily I have kind of the same moral value system that a lot of conservatives have. But I think conservatives end up wanting to use the government to push their values, and that is not the way to do it. If you look at like marriage, I've thought for a while now that the government should just not be involved in marriage. You shouldn't have marriage licenses. We need to start getting away from the reliance on the government and just speak truth to the world, and don't use government force to try and make your points.
No, in the sense of I know you're a Christian man and you have a Christian background and family. I also have a Christian background. This is where maybe we'll disagree a little bit. I don't see it as a religious aspect of it. I think that's just a narrative that many people try to pull. I see it more like a constitutional issue, and whether the federal government has a right to involve in these matters per se. Neither does the state. I know that there's been cases in the Supreme Court where many of these cases where they involve the 14th Amendment to a violation of due process. But yet again, this is where the 14th Amendment has been so grossly misinterpreted that I don't think it's a 14th Amendment issue after all. I don't think it's I don't think it is a 14th Amendment. They need to apply the correct one. Like I said before, starting the program, it's your right to privacy, it's your personal rights, And I believe that they should have followed challenges on the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment is it's one of the most underrated amendments out there. That's the one that your rights are protected and neither the state or the federal government are allowed to infringe on it, and they're retained by us, the people. And, like I said, if you want to do it in closed doors, that's fine. That's your business. And no police officer, like they did with Mr. Hardwick back in 1982, has every right to come in and impose justice like that. But to show that, then we moved on from Bowers to Lawrence versus Texas, and then Obergefell versus Hodges. And that's where you started your 14th Amendment challenge, where you have honestly no constitutional basis. It's just like Bernie Sanders saying that Biden should invoke the 14th Amendment to handle the debt ceiling. That has no bearing whatsoever. So I think it's mostly a constitutional issue that people need to see it, and they need to look at the Ninth Amendment. And I wish they would go back on Obergefell versus Hodges and say, hey, listen, it's your Ninth Amendment right, and we're not going to infringe on it. So, but as far as traditional marriage as well, I think government should not be in dictate who to marry or what to marry, whether it's traditional or non-traditional. Like when George W. Bush proposed the Traditional Marriage Act, constitutional amendment back in 2005, I think that was wrong of him. I don't think government should be involved, and plain and simple, neither church or government needs to be involved in these matters.
It's ultimately the government is the problem. We discuss this every week, but I did just a little search this week. We're going to talk about this topic, and I found out that the first time that marriage was even recognized in federal law was with the passage of the Revenue Act of 1913, which was the first income tax. It established the first federally considered constitutional because of the 16th Amendment income tax. So that's the first time federal government really put its nose into marriages. And it wasn't until 1929 that all states had laws regarding marriage licenses. So, a majority of American history, the government basically stayed out. I think a lot of states, people would register their marriages with the state just for documentation purposes. But, that wasn't really the government being involved. It was just, to have some documentation to know that this happened. With a lot of stuff that we discuss, we kind of think that this has been established American tradition, and it really hasn't. It's only been, at most half of America's history that we've had the government involved in marriage. And, quite frankly, the other thing that I looked up was trying to find out what were the reasonings behind a lot of marriage licenses. And you'll find a lot of states actually instituted marriage licenses to stop interracial marriages. So, that's what happens when you get the government involved. Is they do it for nefarious reasons, for stupid reasons, for controlling reasons. That's what it's all about, is control. And I don't care if you're from the left or the right. Using government to control people is wrong. And I obviously have strong opinions on same-sex marriage personally, but I don't want to use the government. I want the church to use their First Amendment right to go into the public sphere to convince people about the morality of it, but not use the government to force it.
On one note, you brought up the Revenue Act 1913. That was just after the federal government got their first rights and their first control of it. So again, it's always a federal government meddling problem into everything. And the 60th Amendment, along with the Revenue Act of 1913, to establish marriage licenses and spousal protection based on man and woman. I mean, again, that's just federal government meddling, not even state. I mean, state government meddling, I would say it's with, when you mention interracial marriage, again, that is unconstitutional. I've always said that if Obergefell versus Hodges was an interracial same-sex marriage, I would say that the 14th Amendment would apply to them more than just if there were two white guys or two white females. Yeah. I think if they were a black man and a white man, I think they have more of a constitutional precedence than if there were two white males or two white females, like with Loving versus Virginia, which that was a great case of equality between two adults, because again, that's the whole point of the 14th Amendment. So, to involve the churches and the government, I think is for the individual itself, because there's still a lot of churches that believe in traditional marriage, even though there's a couple of Methodists and a few Episcopalians that are opening up to this type of marriage. But I think it should be up to the individual, and that's why I looked at the Ninth Amendment. And many people don't. I mean, they don't quite see that. And I've always tried to. I mean, in Griswold versus Connecticut, where it was contraception use between marriage couples, they invoked the Ninth Amendment challenge, and they got it. And it's, why should police officers say, oh, you can't wear a condom or you can't wear a diaphragm? That's up to them if they want to do it. That's not up to the state government. So, again, it's up to state and local government to get involved, not involve the federal government per se. And that's where you get a lot of miscommunication, misinterpretations of everything. The federal government has really meddled in a lot of issues that they shouldn't meddle in the first place.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is I view marriage as a sacred union that shouldn't be taken lightly. But I look at what happens when the government gets involved. We start getting all these financial incentives. And people getting married just so that they can have, tax incentives and stuff like that. And I'm always, because I believe in a very limited government. If the government didn't create this massive tax system, wasn't meddling in every other aspect of our life, I think there wouldn't be such a cry for gay marriage. It's just kind of like, but just I don't have a problem with if we had the government out of it, and institutions wanted to allow gay marriage. Well, that doesn't hurt me. But as long as you're not forcing my church to marry gay couples. But I just don't think there'd be such a demand for it if we didn't have all these so-called special rights that come from government with the tax code and things like that. And I'd also say that this kind of just a philosophical thing for me, a foundational thing is, I have a problem with the way we discuss like group rights. Like I don't believe in gay rights, and I don't believe in straight rights. I believe in human rights. And that's what the government's supposed to protect, is our fundamental human rights that all of us have, regardless of how we identify sexually, on our race, whatever. We don't have special group rights. We have human rights. And that's something I think we've lost, and that's contributed to the tribalism that we have. And now, we need gay rights, we need straight rights, we need, minority rights, majority rights, women's rights, men's rights. How about we just talk about what are our fundamental human rights? And we've kind of lost that. We all want our tribe's rights to be protected, and we don't care about the other tribe's rights. And that's a big contributing factor to all the problems that we see today.
I'm glad you brought up. I'll see your point for rights, but I'm glad you brought up incentives. And I have a big issue when they start growing up with gay rights and transgender rights and gender identity rights and benefits. And I have a big issue about that. And for example, when the women's rights movement began in the 1970s, and they were starting with the ERA, with the Equal Rights Amendment, which there are only a couple of shy votes in entering that amendment to the Constitution, which I don't think they will. But the reason why, I'm all for equal rights. I'm all for rights for citizens. Human rights is worldwide, but as a citizen of this country, I'm all for citizen rights, and citizen rights based on, like I said, I sound myself like a broken record, but citizen rights within the Ninth Amendment. But I'm all for citizen rights. But when I see the Equal Rights Amendment or transgender rights, and they attach funding into it, when they attach incentives into it, I have a big problem, because that's federal tax dollars going to this particular group or right. And like you said, you're right. So that's why I oppose the Equal Rights Amendment, because they're attaching funding and care for Planned Parenthood, for gender affirming care or whatever. And that's where I have a big issue. Our rights don't come with funding. Our rights come within the Constitution, and that's about it. Funding comes privately, not publicly. So that's where I have a big issue with this group in particular, with homosexuals, transgender, gender identity, all those groups that are asking for these type of rights. They're asking for funding as well. Why should I fund for your sex change operation? That's your problem. That's your issue. You find a way how, if you want a private charity to give it to you, fine. You want private insurance to cover that, fine by me. Not my, hopefully it's not going to be my insurance, because then my rates will go up. But there has to be some sort of a stop there, and that's where I also have a big issue. Is that when they talk about all these rights and like you said, they attach the funding behind it, and that's where I oppose. I don't want federal funding for this. I will support an Equal Rights Amendment if there's no federal funding. I will support a gay rights amendment, or a straight amendment if there's no funding. But again, this is where the Trumper movement comes in, Seth. They talk about white privilege and white rights, but they want their funding. They want their government check. No. I don't. I have a problem with federal funding as a whole for anybody. We are not to look up for the federal government for dependency. We want independency from the federal government. So that's my main concern. And then of course the Trumper movement, they only glorify their homosexual support, like Milo and Richard Grenell, but not to other ones, because they're not ours, they're not Trumpers. I don't care. You can't be a hypocrite. So, but that's one of my main concerns that I have, is I don't want funding attached to any of these Pride months or whatever.
Yeah, and just on the the so-called right of today, that they're all behind Trump, and because it's such a it's such a mess if you look at the movement, because there are a lot of people in the Trump world who are not conservative at all, and they don't. I mean, Trump's not a conservative, but they don't express anything conservative. And then there are the dyed-in-the-wool conservatives who are behind Trump. And I just, to that crowd, how you've undermined all of your arguments with the hypocrisy. Like, if you go back, Biden signed that, what was it called? Biden signed the Marriage Act, the Respect for Marriage Act.
Oh, the DOMA?
Yeah. And that required some Republican senators to vote for it. And, I remember the conservatives were very vocal with their opposition to those Republican senators who voted for it. But Donald Trump actually held a celebration of Biden signing this with the log cabin Republicans the weekend after, and the conservatives say nothing about it. They continue to support Donald Trump. Hey, folks, I mean, what is it? What's you start wondering, do you really have a problem with gay marriage? Do you really have a problem with these issues, or are you just political hacks? And, whether you agree one way or another on these issues, when you're giving this hypocritical support to one politician who is vocally supporting something you say you oppose, you've just undermined every argument you have. And the other thing, just on the idea of funding, I mean, you can kind of look at the Pride Month, and it's the LGBTQ community and stuff, and say maybe the opposite is pro-family stuff. And I remember in 2021, I wrote for the Liberty Loft a piece called "Pro-Family Socialism is Neither Pro-Family Nor Conservative." And that was because Tucker Carlson had interviewed the Polish president, Duda, and Duda was just talking about all these pro-family welfare programs that he's pushing, and Tucker Carlson was in awe and amazement, like, I wish we had these programs here in America. And I'm like, we have plenty of socialist programs here in America, and just because you put the label pro-family on it doesn't make it right. And that's what happens is, the right gets offended by their tax dollars being used to support things they don't approve of. And then they answer that with wanting to use the government to give tax dollars to things the other side doesn't approve of. This has to stop. We need to have foundation and principles that this is not the government. If you believe in family, and I believe in the power of family and the important role of family, I believe in it so much, I don't want the government intervening. I believe a strong family unit is so powerful, it doesn't need government to create it or to incentivize it. And this is what happens: is that the left and the right just playing for their own special government programs instead of wanting independence from the government.
No, and a point to that, I know people like Tucker Carlson and all these Trumpers that look up to the Polish president or Viktor, or their hero on the foreign affairs, Viktor Orban, which I still I call him the Arrow Cross Prime Minister of Hungary, because I think he's just another bit of a fascist dictator. But they look up into pro-family and government involvement in that side of Christian pro-family. But again, I don't care what they do in Hungary. I don't care what they do in Poland, because their system of government is it's not what this country is about. So, I laugh when I see Trumpers glorify Viktor Orban or the Polish president or or the Italian Prime Minister Meloni. I laugh at them because I'm like saying to myself, wait, hold on, you're comparing a central government of a European country to our form of government? Since the establishment of this country, we are not seeking a central government of anything, whether from the left or the right or Republican or Democrat or gay or straight or black or white. We are seeking a small limited federal government, but an autonomous state governments that share that same rights, for all. And the sad thing is that again I bring up this issue. We brought this issue before. The world has made a mockery of the United States because of the slavery issue and the civil rights issue and the segregation issue, and we've become a laughingstock of that. If people would have just read the Constitution and admitted that we had to fight a stupid war on this stupid issue of slavery because there were some ignorant people out there, and well, okay, fine, they're freed, we have to give them rights, they're citizens of this country, yada yada yada, we wouldn't have the problems that we have now. And then we've now extended those problems into same-sex and gender identity and transgender and all that stuff that still people misunderstand the form of this country, from Trumpers to the left. It ceases to amaze me that Trumpers are just like the left. They want their central government just for them, and not for anybody else. And the left, they want it just for them and not anybody else. And that's not how it's supposed to be. And in the 1960s, LBJ, when he passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he put in funding into that. I mean, why would you put funding for something that was that we needed to end, which is civil rights for all and rights for all citizens? Why did we need funding for education or poverty and all that? We just increased the federal government to an enormous proportion, even though the Civil Rights Act is constitutional because of the 14th Amendment. But the attachment of funding is where I draw the line. The attachment of funding for anything is where I draw a line. From the Trumpers when they talk about their pro-family and their white privilege, or to the gay community when they talk about their gay rights. No funding whatsoever. And it's just really sad to see people being dependent and this bickering where we should just come in unity and say, hey, we're all citizens, we all have to come together. No funding, no nothing. But again, Trumpism and leftism is one of the same that's really ruined this republic.
Yeah, and I think like one of the big issues around all of this, LGBTQ stuff, that really exemplifies this to me is this transgenders in women's sports, and the conservatives are now, praising Title IX, which Title IX was a big government funding apparatus to make sure that girls had just as many opportunities in sports as boys in high schools and, in school settings and colleges and universities and the public school system. And that Title IX has led to the destruction of countless numbers of boys' programs because, hey, reality check here, boys tend to be more interested in sports than girls. Now, I don't have a problem with girls who want to play sports, but boys tend to be more interested in sports than girls. So how do we create this equality among the sexes? Well, we just destroy boys' programs so that there's an equal number of girls at each school playing sports as there are boys. Well, this is what happens when you invite the government into something that they have no place being in the first place. And, I think about, but now the conservatives are using that say that they want to protect girls' sports. It all goes back to the funding. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, what is the government stealing money from me to fund any sports program? I don't care if it's these school athletic programs at public schools, or, you know, the money they give to millionaire and billionaire sports owners to build their stadiums. This is not the function of government. And, you know, if you actually had the government out of it and all athletic programs were privately funded, you know what? If a private sports league wants to allow transgenders into women's sports, then have at it. I don't have a say in that because you're not stealing money from me to fund it. But I actually think that wouldn't be a big problem because there aren't that many transgenders in the first place. So, I mean, it invites this political atmosphere that, creates these issues. And, you know, I don't think this would be an issue if the government weren't involved in it in the first place.
No, you're right, and this is where I come in and still sound like a broken record. It's the storyline that they want to bring up for funding and all that. And I remember when I worked for a company in D.C. and it was a publicly traded company, and I had to take a webinar on the social policies of sexual harassment and all that. And they had a subject of gender identity, and I do remember this very clearly. It said gender identity has no protection, has no federal law protection, but that doesn't mean that you have to respect that people's decision, and that's fine. I can respect if you see yourself as a woman, or if you see yourself as a man, and that I will respect that, and I have no problem whatsoever. What I have a problem is when you're asking the federal government or a state government to help you with your transgender operation and give you funds for that. That I have a problem with, because you're taking my tax dollars according to the 16th Amendment, and my state has either has a state income tax or no state income tax or federal income tax, and you're asking for that help. The same thing for, the attachment of funding for the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. I have a big issue with that. That's why, many people thought Barry Goldwater was a racist. Barry Goldwater was not a racist. Barry Goldwater was all for the Civil Rights Bill. The only problem is that the funding attached to it was the issue. Oh, you have to say that, Seth?
I was thinking about Barry Goldwater too, so I was just kind of agreeing with you.
Yeah, so many, people call them a racist and a bigot, and they go, no, wait a minute. The three Republicans that voted against the Civil Rights Bill were not racist. The racists that voted against it were people like Richard Russell and James Eastland and John Stennis and Russell Long and all those Dixiecrats that switched over to Republicans. Those were the racists. Those were the bigots. Barry Goldwater and the three Republicans who voted against it were just against the funding, was just against federal funding on that. And that's where I see here the issue on that is the funding. And this thing of, again, I saw on my on a few Twitter feeds that Lockheed Martin sponsored a Pride Parade, sponsored the Pride Parade in D.C. I said, okay, if Lockheed Martin wants to spend it with their money, I don't care. If that's federal money, I have a big issue. It probably is part of federal money because they receive a lot of money. So then I would be against it. But if they want to spend it on their own money, I have no problem. It's federal funding that I have a problem with.
Yeah, and just as you bring that up, that reminds me of this funny ad that the Libertarian running for Senate in New Hampshire put out called "War is Gay." Or he was kind of mocking how, because the anti-war left doesn't exist anymore. But he was kind of making the point that if they just put the gay veneer on it, that's how easy it is to get the left to support wars. But It really comes down to the funding apparatus. If it's private individuals using their own funds, I'm have at it. Whatever you want to do, just don't steal my money for whatever you want to do. And I don't care if it's a left-wing cause, a right-wing cause, whatever. Stop stealing my money and do it yourself. I guess when it comes to like you brought up sex change operations, and I'm somebody who is opposed to all government funding in healthcare at all. So I don't care if it's healthcare that I deem legitimate or not. It's not the government's role to be involved in healthcare. So I absolutely agree. That sex change operations, or just an appendectomy, should not be funded by the taxpayers. We've lost that principle that you need to provide for your own health care. I need to provide for my own health care. It's not the government's role. And I guess the only role that I see that I would agree with conservatives today when it comes to that is I do believe the state should make it illegal. And this is a state level issue, but it should make it illegal for children to have sex change operations, because it's not safe at that age. And we do have laws. Children can't drink before they're 21. They can't smoke before, I think it's 21 now for smoking too. So I don't have a problem with those laws, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, on that note, I also want to bring up Justice Thomas, which I rarely, and I emphasize rarely, agree on, but in his dissenting opinion of Lawrence versus Texas, which that was a Texas sodomy law, he said, if I were a member of the Texas legislature, I would vote to repeal it. And that's a great example of somebody who understands the concept that it's not up to the role of federal government. If Texas is a bad law, you can repeal it, or you can go back to your state and local issues and get there, but you don't need to involve the federal government in that. And on the sense of I think on the sex change or child care operations for transgender for children, I think it's a little bit irresponsible to put children on that, because children are at an age with vivid imaginations, and they're still growing, they're still developing. And I think there should be some sort of once they're 18, if they want to have a sex change operation, if they want to be gender binary or whatever, fine by me. But children are, or teenagers should be at an age where you cannot have that type of control and that type of it is a sense of control on the left, because they want to control the children on what they think, if they want to be a little effeminate or a little butch. So it is kind of a control, and it's abusing to the children. Now, I'm not talking in the sense of like if I'm Marjorie Greene, but I think reasonable age should be reasonable on that. I don't think you should deny their right as a citizen when they reach 18. Because that's a violation of the Ninth Amendment. But I think there should be some sort of child protection on that matter. But let it be by state, not by federal government. Because California may want to do it, that's fine. If California wants to have that type of legislation to allow children under the age of 10 to change sex operations, hey, not my tax dollars. I'm sure Barbara Feinstein, Dianne Feinstein, and the other senator will gladly give them funds, because we live in a dependent country now. But if it's passed by the legislature, I have no issues. But I'm going to probably vote against that legislation until a reasonable age is done. But again, my main concern is no federal funding. I don't care what you do in your own state. Education, you can do whatever you want. That's the genius of this Republic of Sovereign States. You have a small, supposed to be non-meddling federal government, and it's up to each individual, each state to plan accordingly. Now, I don't believe what DeSantis is doing here in my home state of Florida. I think what he's doing is also invoking his own indoctrination of his own anti-woke, whatever he likes to call it, stance. I don't think so. I think there should be a reasonable age to do it. But again, it all comes individually and state and local.
Yeah, and DeSantis recently said something about if he's elected president, woke's gonna die across the country. He's gonna kill woke, and I know it plays up to the base, but this is the problem: is as president, your job is to get the government out of the way. Okay, I have a lot of the same problems with the what's called woke, and I don't know exactly what woke is. I mean, but that a lot of conservatives have. But you're trying to use the government to fight this, and that's kind of one of the things I wanted to make the case in that my Pride Month series that I wrote. Is that, this is a job for churches and pastors, and, the government's not there to fight woke. You are, as free individuals who have the same First Amendment rights as everybody else, use your First Amendment to beat back at the culture. But the culture wars are something that free people should be engaged in fighting and not using government. I mean, DeSantis is not going to kill woke. I'm sorry, he's not God. He cannot do that. His job is to go in there, get the government out of the way, so we as free people can have these discussions, have these debates, have these battles, whatever you want to call it, as free people. But we've got to stop looking towards politicians to stop these things that, like I said, I agree with conservatives a lot on these problems are real. I have a problem with our culture and, the immorality that I see in our culture. And it's not just, woke stuff. It's all over the place, but it's not the government's job to fight these battles. The government's job's there to make sure justice is in place and make sure our individual liberty is protected. And all these other issues, we need to be fighting these issues, these battles on our own as free individuals in a free country again, because we're not a free country today, and we need to get back to a free country. And then I think we are able to have these discussions and these debates with people that we might disagree with on things a lot easier. We're not going to be at each other's throat if we're not trying to steal their money to fund our projects and our programs.
Yeah, no, you're right. And, the word woke, I still don't know, ever since Trump was elected and he came out, I still don't know what covfefe means or woke means. I mean, they just come up with these random words that make no sense. And, it's DeSantis' own form of central control as well as Biden's or the left central control. It's just, it's control. It's control on the so-called pro-family and the control for, I don't know how, it's not really anti-family, but just the control for social control. And, I still believe that people should look up to the 9th for that. The 1st, of course, is important, but the 9th is more important. And this will be my final thought onto our listeners and viewers. The enumeration in the Constitution, of certain rights, shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Of certain rights, I would say that same-sex marriage, homosexual relationship, that is certain rights. Or even heterosexual love and marriage, like Crystal versus Connecticut. Those are certain rights that if I want to have a contraception with my wife and I want to put on a condom with my wife, that's my right and my personal privacy, and neither the state or the federal government has a right to get involved in that. So I want really people to understand the 9th Amendment. And I want people to really see that when I say of certain rights, those are the rights that we're talking about. And it should not be involved with the federal government. They should protect us, not fund us. And that's why I want to really also point out, the government's there to protect us, not to fund us. And that's why I'm really sticking against all this funding that's going on right now. It's so unconstitutional. I don't know where to begin, but that's for another topic. But I just want to leave it at that. People, look up to the 9th, because the 9th is a very underrated amendment to our rights. It's a violation that's going on, and people need to know that.
Yeah, and I just add on to that is that the Constitution sets up a list of what are called negative rights for us. These are rights that the government cannot interfere with. But we've become a culture in a country, in a society that believes in positive rights. Like, I have a right to other people's money for my program. Well, no, you don't. We have rights that the government is not there to interfere with. And if we got back to understanding that, we could fix a lot of these issues a lot more easily. But we've become an entitled society that has a right to this service, a right to that service, when you don't have a right to anything. I mean, I have this view that, quite frankly, you're entitled to nothing in this world except what you're willing to work for. And even then, we live in an unfair world where, like, even if you work for it, you might not always get what you've earned. But people feel entitled to stuff, and we need to smack that entitlement idea in the face. I mean, that's the big problem that leads to all these other problems.
Yeah, no, you're right. We need to stop this funding, this entitlement funding of whatever, just because our feelings have been hurt. Then seek protection, but not seek funding, and that's where I draw the line there. And you're absolutely right, Seth. So, do you have one final thought?
I just reiterate, strive for independence from the state, and just do things as free people and not as part of a collective.
Good point there. That's right. So anyway, let's hope we enjoy this rest of the month. It goes fast, and on to the month of July, which is our independence, and from tyranny and from central autonomy. And let's just look up to this 4th of July. And with that note, have yourself a good week ahead and a good month ahead. And we will catch up next Sunday.
Yep.
Thanks so much.